everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Rolling Through Life. This week we have a very special episode. Instead of being joined with Jim, I have a new special guest on the podcast. It's my mom and Jim's wife, Isabelle. So Isabelle, introduce yourself.
Hello everybody, and my name's Isabelle Chagnon, and I am Jim Ryan's wife.
You are indeed, and you were along with Jim when he had his accident just about 2 years ago, right?
Yes, it's a little over 2 years ago now. Yeah, I was with him, and it feels like a whole lifetime away.
Yeah, it feels like a whole lifetime has passed, and it truly was a different life, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So before we jump in, I'm just going to get you to retell the story of the accident from your perspective. We've heard on the podcast Jim tell the story and what he remembers of the accident in the early days. And we've talked a little bit about what you did to get him through that, but all from his eyes. So just take me through the accident, the day of the accident, what happened, and how you got to hospital and that kind of stuff, and then we'll move forward from there.
Well, the story starts the same way Jim started it, for sure. That it was another beautiful day in paradise, and we had just arrived. Really, it was early in our 2-week stay in Hawaii. And we had decided that morning, waking up, and we were having breakfast on the front balcony, and we were gonna go hang out at Little Beach for the day. And as he talked about, it was probably that first morning that we had allowed ourselves to talk about what would retirement look like. It wasn't planned imminently. It was really a planning exercise for what the next 3 to 5, 6 years look like for us, trying to pave that way. So we had breakfast and headed off to the beach. Beautiful drive, and Little Beach is kind of hidden away. It's tucked away. You park at McKenna Park parking. You walk on to Big Beach, and to access Little Beach, you climb over some pretty big cliffs to get to Little Beach. And there we were, a beautiful day, and we'd just been hanging out in the sun, reading books. And suddenly it was hot, and I said I wanted to cool off. And we had a rule. This is our, we had a buddy system. And so sadly, I don't think Jim was really excited about going in the water, but he just said, I'll come with you. And that was the beginning, I guess. We went off and cooled off and played in the waves like normal. The waves weren't really overly strong. They weren't tiny either, but they were not. We've always assessed that, and it seemed okay. So we're ready to come out, and exactly as Jim said, we're looking at the waves always, and we're trying to come out, but we can tell the waves are coming at us, so it's better to not turn our backs. And this one wave was building, and you could see it, and Jim was right behind me and just said, okay, get ready. You have to dive under this one. And I just said, I'm ready. And we both dove about the same time. And coming out of that wave, I'll never, ever forget just looking around. And initially you think, haha, very funny, like, I don't see you. You must be still swimming underwater. But very quickly, I realized something was wrong. And then that's when the panic really sets in. You know something is wrong, and you don't know what it is. And so I'm treading water and trying to frantically look around, because it's obvious to me now that I don't know what's happened. I literally don't know what's happened. So I'm frantically looking around, and finally, and I'm in these waves that are coming and going. So it's not steady water. It's hard to see. There's a lot of sun. There's glare on the water. And suddenly I literally spot maybe, I don't know, distance and time are hard to judge. I'm going to say maybe 20 meters away, just the patch of skin, basically between his shoulder blades. That's all that was floating out of water. And I just started moving. I swam as fast as I could. And I'll say here that time just stops. Time absolutely stops. And you just do. So I swim to him. I flip him over. He is dead weight. He's completely limp. I have no idea if he's dead or alive at this point. And I grabbed under the arm and the shoulder and just gently flipped him on with his head resting on my shoulder. But it's obvious to me that I can't drag him back. He's half drowning me at this point, and I'm just trying to stay out of water. And so I did the only thing I could. I screamed like it was the end of the earth. And I screamed so loud. I just remember it's like you don't even know what sound you're making. But it was very loud. And I remember watching the beach at the same time as I screamed, help. That's all I kept repeating, help, 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 as loud as I could. And people on the beach, I could see right away, looked up and started paying attention, trying to locate the sound. And then from that moment on, everybody jumped. People were on their phones. People ran over the cliffs. People jumped in the water and helped me drag him back. And so that's what happened there. What else do you want to know there, Daniel? Where do I go from here?
Well, so you mentioned time, distance are hard to judge in that period of time, especially looking back. And how long do you think it was from when you surfaced to when you saw him and got to him?
I remember the lifeguard asking me that over and over again. And the reason is, and at the time, you don't realize that. I know now, because he looked dead, because he did die on the beach, they wanted to know, is it even worth trying to resuscitate? And then they asked me over and over, and I just kept repeating, I was fast. And they said, give me a number. And I remember, I think I told them less than 2 minutes, but I have no idea. I truly don't. Time just stops. And so we got him out on the beach. I remember kind of collapsing and everybody took over. And then I started to go into shock, basically. My whole body started to shake. I was starting to hyperventilate. And I don't know if it was a lifeguard or a person on the beach who touched me on the shoulder and said, are you okay? Are you okay? Do you need any medical help? And I remember looking at Jim and seeing the gray skin, the pinprick pupils, the belly breathing, basically his body trying to come back to life, but basically hanging in the middle. And I remember this voice. Now people are going to think I'm crazy, but I truly remember this inside voice that just went, get your shit together, woman. Sorry, are we allowed to say that on podcast?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
And you're not hurt. And I knew if I divided the medical attention, Jim wouldn't get the right medical attention. I was basically unhurt apart from the, I'm going to say, major emotional trauma of, pulling your perhaps dead husband out of the water, but physically. So literally I heard this voice saying, get your shit together. Like, you're not hurt. You need to be there for him. And I started to do what I literally consciously started to do my yogi breath and told this person, whoever they were, no, I need to be there, and literally crawled at this point. I couldn't really stand up, and crawled over, and Jim had 4 or 5 lifeguards around him at that time. Again, I can't, those details are gone, but I remember just hanging on to his foot because everybody else was at the head and chest, so it was busy up there, and I just hung on to his foot. And that's when I had my the most incredible peaceful moment of my life. I basically said my goodbyes. I actually said, I held on to his foot, and very quietly with my inside voice, I said, you know, I have no regrets, basically. I literally have no regrets. I have loved you every day of my life. I've told you I loved you. I have done everything for you and with you that I ever wanted to do. And so that's when you truly understand what that means. You know, people say, oh, you know, live with no regrets or whatever. But when it comes to the end,
that's when you realize
there is no second chance. And to have that peace inside, that there is nothing else you'd want to say, you know, that they are leaving you with the knowledge that they were loved, basically.
Yeah. So at this point, had you resigned himself to being dead? Did you think at this time that he was dead and that was the end?
I didn't know. I truly didn't know. It's not something you want to believe right away.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew there was a fair chance. Yeah. I mean, I'm a medical person by background. I've worked ICUs. I've seen what I saw on that beach, and you know, I knew this was the end of something.
Yeah. It was the end of the life as you knew it at that point in time.
Yeah, and I definitely knew that it was serious and that, yes, he could be gone. And, yeah. And then at that, go ahead.
Well, it sounds like you're about to get there yourself, but so we've talked about that moment, the moment when you said your goodbyes, live with no regrets. But there's one more moment I want to talk about on the beach, and that's the moment when he started to come back. So let's talk about that, when you realized that this wasn't the end and there was a new chapter to the story.
So the lifeguards, you know, strange. So I said my goodbyes, and I was just staying there, just letting people do their work and not interfering. And suddenly the lifeguards are saying, we think he's in there. He's hearing us. Like, you have to talk to him, say something. And I remember leaving his foot at that time. And again, this is for me, a medical reaction. Jim will say, when he tells the story, says it really calmly, and Isabelle says whatever. But the living through it, it was quite more intense because I'm medical. I didn't think about it. I left his foot immediately and crawled over to be right beside his head. And hearing is the last thing that will go. So when you die, everything shuts down, and the last sense to go, to disappear, is your sense of hearing. And so if there's any way to call someone back, you can. They can hear you when you think they're dead or when they're partially dead. And so I pounded that. I literally pounded the sand right beside his head. I think they thought I was there to finish him off. But I literally pounded the sand beside his head and yelled, like just yelled, this is not the end of the story, we have, and this is a joke, an inside joke between Jim and I, you know, you owe me another 30 years on the contract, was, I don't know, somehow always an inside joke that we said, you know, we give it a go for a good 70 years, and then if it didn't work, we could call it quits. But we always said there was another 30 years. Yeah, there's another 30 more years. I don't know. We just had this running joke. So if there was anything, I don't know, it just came out. You don't know what's going to come out of your mouth when you're in high stress situation.
Yeah, when you're in a live or die situation. Okay, so we can, that's quite emotional. I can't even imagine, as I've talked to with Dad a lot, but these are moments and parts of the story that Dad doesn't have much insight on, and he can't really share these details. He doesn't remember a lot, obviously. He does remember you pounding on the sand, I think, but he doesn't have these details, so I think having you retell the story fills in some parts of the details that people listening to the podcast may not have heard before. I think if people read the stories on our website, they've heard this before, but I think it is a different thing to have you tell the story and really bring some life to those words.
Yes.
So we'll move on from that and talk about a little bit about your new life, as we talked about the new chapter that you guys are now living. So through a whole bunch of help from all sorts of strangers and the lifeguards and everything else, you guys made to the hospital, and then you made to Vancouver, and through GF Strong and everything. And throughout all of that, you know, almost a year after the accident, you guys moved home and started living from home. And Jim has talked about this before, about the transition to living at home and how to do everything and that kind of stuff. But something that kind of gets glossed over a lot, and I think a lot of people miss, is that on top of being his wife, you're now his full-time caretaker. Whether or not you like it, whether or not he likes it, you are the one ultimately who has to help him with everything. And despite having, you know, we have home health and other sorts of services that do come and provide assistance, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but you ultimately are his caregiver. So before we get into that too much, I just want you to try and define what a caregiver is in your own words, because I think a lot of people have different views on what a caregiver is and what is entailed. So how would you describe a caregiver?
Well, I have trouble with your question, so I'm going to throw it back to you, and I'll say, what is a caregiver to you? What do you see as a caregiver? And then I'll tell you if it's different.
And this is something that the reason why I'm asking this question is because I realized I didn't have a clear picture on what a caregiver was.
What did you think it was initially then?
So before caregiver, I always viewed a caregiver as like a job position that somebody could be employed as a caregiver and not really forced into it, is the first part that I didn't really understand. That I thought you would voluntarily be a caregiver. You would you know go to school as a nurse or whatever, and then you'd get employed as a caregiver. And the classic examples for people, for the elderly and elderly homes and stuff like that. And I would say those still are caregivers, but it's very different. And like this is where my perspective changes. One, they're very much volunteering for the job. They're getting paid to do the job and they're trained to do the job. But their job stops, right? They go home and they're no longer a caregiver. They go home and live their own life. And that wasn't the case for you. Not only did you not volunteer for the job, you were forced into it, as I kind of led in with my question, but you never stop being his caregiver. I would even go so far as to say when he does have that employed help, those other caregivers whose job it is to help him, I would still say you're his caregiver and you have to come in and help him. And so I've seen it, you know, up close, and that you do literally everything from feeding to bathing to helping him go to the bathroom, as he's alluded to as a terrible situation that we try and avoid discussing. But these are realities that you have to get in and get dirty and do everything. And I don't think people understand, like, you know, again, my perspective before all of this was that a caregiver is somebody who helps the elderly get into bed or helps them, you know, eat their dinner or whatever, do their dishes and just help them get through, but aren't really like, you know,
but as a job, you see it, that's their job, and then they have a life. Whereas now life become, as a caregiver in this situation, you're living. So here are these good conversation, good answer is you're in my situation, my life with Dad, Jim, becomes my job. Because living life is a huge 24/7 job to do anything with Dad. And I guess I took it on by choice. This is a tragic event. Your dad, Jim, is dependent for everything, absolutely everything. He, his brain works, but he is dependent physically for absolutely everything but breathing. And so I realized that if we're going to have any kind of a life or any quality to that life, I had to know his care inside and out, because nobody else is going to care as much. Nobody else is going to, nobody else lives with him. So in order to have any kind of a life and to be able to do the things that we've wanted to do, including going to your wing ceremony and to Joseph's graduation and to Genevieve's being called to the bar and all those life events that are important to us, it's extremely difficult to hire out for that kind of thing. And so we had a choice. Either we stay home and have a very, I think your dad would call it, basically when he's at home and we're not able to do anything, it's like you're waiting to die. Whereas to have a full life, being a caregiver as a wife is really trying to put some of the quality back into a life. Trying to put some joy back into a life, trying to provide some kind of reason for living.
Yeah, for sure. So one other thing that kind of goes along these lines about living a full life and doing things, and as you said, not just sitting at home, is that Jim, and I know him quite well, always wants to do everything. Because I know there have been times when he pushes himself to do as many things as he possibly can to his detriment, and it ends up that he ends up injuring himself and costing himself a couple weeks of recovery. So as his caregiver and his wife, what is it like do you feel that you sometimes have to try and pull him back and to stop him from doing things or limit him in any way to prevent injury, or do you just let him live life as he wishes to live it and then come and clean up afterward? I hate to put it that way, but
no, that's a tough one. That's a very fine line that we play all the time. My previous job as a therapist helps a bit, where you try to highlight the things that could go wrong, but ultimately, it's like raising you kids. You can't really couldn't make you do as a teenager or not do something. Just had to kind of suggest either alternatives or also suggest possible outcomes if you decide to go that way. I think I've only, and I realize that what he pushes himself, and there's a reason for that. Him pushing himself gives him a reason to live.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an important goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I try to play along. I think I have so far only said no to one of his trips or ideas, and I don't think he was very happy. And I said, I basically ended it and said, okay, well, you can go. You've planned it. You can go. I am not. And
Can I ask what trip that was? Or is that privy
no,
information?
no, it's not. He wanted to go to Sun Peaks. I really wanted to go to Sun Peaks this winter. He had one of his therapists that was in VGH was going, and we've gotten to be really close with her, and we've met her partner, and they were going to be there, and we've been up as socially now a couple of times. So he really wanted to go.
And why did you say no for a guy who's gone paddle boarding and sturgeon fishing and all these crazy adventures? What caused you to draw the line here?
And I drew the line because right or wrong, I said I could not see anything fun about it. When your dad gets cold, and he gets cold in Chilliwack, in the house, I couldn't see taking a van in the middle of winter to the top of a mountain, and I could see too many hurdles, too many obstacles, and for me, too many risks.
Right.
And on the top, so it's not necessarily the risks. I don't mind the risks, but I couldn't see any part of it being really fun, because when there's too many problems, it's too exhausting. So his idea was we would go and he could do the après-ski all day, and I could go skiing. But I mean, how is that going to work if it takes me 2 hours to get you up into your chair? By then it's lunchtime. I'm exhausted, and I really don't want to ski because there's no more energy for it.
Yeah. So
right?
Ultimately, benefits didn't outweigh the cost. Is that fair?
There was I couldn't. He could see some fun into it. I couldn't, from my perspective. I couldn't, and there was just too many hurdles. Mm-hmm. I think for me it was, and I'll say for me because it was too much. There was too many problems to solve to be fun.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that's a good reason. I mean, it's got to be tough, I think, for him. Like I said, we just talked about this, about how you having to sometimes suggest he doesn't do a thing, against what he wants to do, but just warning him that it's not going to end well. And I think sometimes it's for him particularly, it's hard to see what could go wrong, or he's always of the attitude of we'll solve the problem and we'll move forward. But I think it's, I think it's a good thing that you're kind of the voice of reason and saying, well, think about this. As you said, right, you get cold in Chilliwack in summer indoors, and you want to go to the top of a mountain in winter. Like, how can this possibly end well? So I think...
I guess I want to add that whether he sees it or not, me saying that to him, basically saying, okay, you plan it. I'm okay with you planning. I'm okay with you going, but I am not going. It is something I'm incapable of doing for you this time. Broke my heart.
Yeah.
It broke my heart, and I don't know that he knows that, but it did. It's not something I ever want to say. I don't take it lightly. I know that these things we do, these crazy, crazy things we do, are life-giving for him.
Yeah. Talking about these crazy, crazy things we do. And I love these episodes with Dad where we talk about him paddleboarding or going sturgeon fishing, because, again, I am always staggered and in disbelief when he tells me the things he did. I'm like, why? How? Like, when? Like, all these questions, and oh man, it just blows my mind, the things he decides that he wants to do. And he's always of the opinion that, like you just said, like, he wants to live a full life. Like, if I'm not doing anything, I'm just waiting to die. But so particularly with the water sports, they're the ones that blow my mind, the paddleboarding and the sturgeon fishing, because as I've said multiple times on this podcast, I would think that if I had drowned, I would be terrified of water and I wouldn't want to go anywhere near it. And yet somehow he thinks it's, he comes to terms with it. I wouldn't say he's okay with it, but he rationalizes the risk. For you, having pulled him out of the water, as we discussed at the beginning of the show, what are your reactions when he says, I want to go paddleboarding or I want to get on a boat and go into the ocean? Do you get nervous? Because I find I get nervous and I'm not even there.
Well, the paddleboarding was probably, sadly, I think I initiated that because I don't think your dad at one point, Patrick and I suggested, Patrick would probably suggested it first because Patrick went to the rec therapist with dad one time at GF Strong and they were explaining what they could do. And then Patrick is who's planted the seed in my head that dad could go maybe paddleboarding. And so I, as a therapist, you want to know, is that ever a possibility? And when I brought it up to dad the first time, it was like, his reaction was definite, like, no, like never. So never.
That's interesting.
And never. He wasn't going to do that. And so that becomes real. And as a therapist, your job becomes to kind of see what's the obstacle and how can you make someone more comfortable. So I let go of it. I let go of that idea of paddleboarding. But then all of a sudden, rec therapist was talking and they mentioned pool. And so without telling that, I thought this is a good step. So the way I explained, I said, well, pool, I think might be really beneficial to you, Jim, because you have a lot of spasm. And so water and hot water, like a therapeutic pool, and a way of getting in and out that's easy would be perfect. You might regain some movement. You can in a pool setting. You really can. So, and you don't know till you try it. So he just said to that, I'll think about it. And that's fine. So he thought about it. And then all of a sudden said, yeah, I would like to try the pool. And the progression there was quite incredible. Basically, the first time we went into the pool, Dad had, oh my God, what did he have? He had a neck floaty. We had some thigh floaties. And I'm trying to think, but we had a third, and I can't remember.
A life jacket?
Yeah, maybe something like that. I can't remember now. Yeah. But he had basically 3 things. And believe it or not, he went from that to the next time we went, we had removed I believe, whatever, the life jacket or chest support. And he had thighs and a neck. And by the 3rd time, and we had decreased the 2nd time, we also decreased the hands-on. So the first time there was 2 of us supporting him with all his stuff and moving him about. So basically it was about just being in the water and breathing. That's all he did that first time. And then we got him out, we keep him warm, we dress him up, and he goes back. And then the 2nd time, we were still 2 in the pool, but really only one of us handling, and we'd remove the big chest support. And by the 3rd time, and this was the final time he went in the water, we put him in the water with literally a neck floaty. And 2 of us were in the pool, but we were hands off.
Yeah.
And he was working then on seeing if he could wiggle his body side to side. Could he move at all? And perhaps more importantly, he was trying to see if he started to roll over, like from lying face up to rolling face down, could he self-correct it somehow by using his neck? And I think that gave him some confidence in the water. So those were the 3 times we did in the water. And then it was sometime after that, I think, that he started. So suddenly he had more confidence. And, you know, we came, well, that was still at GF Strong. We came home and I was still doing active in paddle boarding, and I'd bring him to the beach and he'd watch from the beach. And I think suddenly with, you know, all his experience and stuff, and he started thinking, well, maybe I can go out on the water.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And I think it brings, again, some, like, when our conversation we had about it, he was just like, yeah, you know, I decided that, you know, I gotta get on living and I want to go paddleboarding. But he, you know, he kind of brushed over the whole pool thing, but it sounds like it was a lot more. And it was interesting to hear that when you first suggested, he was a solid no, I'm never doing that, because again, like talking to him after the fact, it was like almost like, yeah, why not? You know, I mean, somebody suggested it, he said, yeah, let's do it. But interesting. So I want to ask you one more time, because you said throughout the entire thing as a therapist that you want to remove barriers or see what the hurdles are. But as his wife, what were your thoughts about it? Like, again, were you nervous at all about having him on the water or near water, or were you just fully supportive of this and helping aid his recovery? Like, what were your emotions about him going near water again?
Interestingly enough, fully supportive. I think if he can live a full life, like you know, we all have the ticket that we're gonna die. This is a given, and fully supportive. When you're not handicapped, not disabled, not injured, you take some calculated risks, and this was well planned, well calculated, well prepared. Yes, can happen, but look what happened on the beach.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, who would have thought that was going to happen? Nobody could have seen that coming. But the reality is that any one of us can be dead in the next 5 minutes from whatever catastrophe is going to befall us. Nobody knows what's around the corner. So fully supportive going in there. I wanted it to be as successful. I worked extremely hard and long. That is also glossed over, but I set up the seating for that. It took me a lot of time, but it worked out. And definitely, I understood the risks. There was only one part, basically, as Jim said, we had a little brief, or he did his own little brief to everybody that was helping him. And his initial thought on the paddleboard was he was just going to have me and Mary as his water goddesses, you know, paddling him around, like, and I just felt that first of all, that wasn't enough paddle power on a very big boat. That, like you said, the thing is 16 feet long, 5 feet wide, and now we have, you know, a chair on and Jim on. I did not enough experience to paddle that well and with any speed or with any dexterity. And yeah, I've kind of lost my thought a little bit, but you can get me back on.
Well, anyway, I just think it's good and it's interesting to me that you were fully supportive. I think it's a great thing. Of course, I'm happy that you were supportive. It's interesting to me because it was like the opposite of my reaction when he said that he wanted to go paddleboarding. I was like, really? Like, because as I said, like, it almost makes me scared to have him near water. And I'm not about to say you can't do anything, as we've discussed, that we don't want to hold him back from anything. And it amazes me that he has the courage to do so. I can't help but think if I was in that situation that I wouldn't want to do anything with water. Like his initial reaction when he suggested this, and he's like, nope, not at all. I think that would be my attitude. But also, I think, you know, him and you raise a good point that my perspective might change wildly if I was a quadriplegic. That not doing anything, not being able to do anything might change my opinion on this matter and be like, you know what, screw it, I want to go and do it because I'm not going to sit here and do nothing. I'm
going to put it this way. Basically, what could go wrong? I mean, he's already died once. It is going to happen. Basically, what happens in something tragic like this, like I said, I'll accept the risks if I see that the benefits, i.e. quality of life benefits, so the joy of living. So if the event is going to give him back some of that joy of living, then it's worth taking the risk. And we have one picture of your dad after paddleboarding, and if we can find it, Daniel, we should put it maybe with the show notes. That's why we do it, because that smile and that twinkle in his eye. I know
exactly. I know exactly which photo you're talking about. Yeah,
that look on his face made it worthwhile for everybody that was part of the event.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And that's, like you say, that's the reason why you take the risk, and that's why you prepare and plan and get ready for everything.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. Anyway, it continues to amaze me. It continues to amaze me the things he decides to do and the things you guys both do together. I say he does, but as much you as him do it because... And this is kind of, I think, what we should highlight in this whole podcast is that everybody is amazed with the success Jim has had and his perseverance and his attitude. But I think I don't think they do it intentionally, but I think it's very easy for people to miss that you are the driving force behind this whole thing. That I think you have succeeded just as much as he has, and you have been determined just as much as he had. And you have gone through just as much as he has. And he's said it numerous times that if it weren't for you, he wouldn't be here. And you continue to be the driving force behind his success. And anyway, I just think it's important to highlight. I think people miss this very often. And I don't think they do it intentionally. I just think when there's a quadriplegic paddleboarding, you say good on you because he's the one on the paddleboard. He's the one succeeding. But what they miss is the wife and caregiver who helped get him there.
I've worked very hard since the beginning, and this part, your dad, Jim, wouldn't know that. But there are things I did purposely to get him started on the road back to that incredible confidence that he has. And so, example of that, we were in GF Strong. It was early, really early on GF Strong, and so you're GF, when you arrive, obviously, initially they'll help you, but the idea is to get you independent and to get you to go down to your appointments on time by yourself. But it was early on, and initially the therapist basically come, and Dad, as you know, is completely paralyzed. He didn't even know how to drive his wheelchair. He didn't even have a wheelchair, and so the therapist would come and get him and bring him down, and slowly they were saying, one of them said, "Oh well, I'll try to come and get you, but I'm not sure. I might be a bit late, but I'll try and come and get you, and if not, then maybe we'll find some other way." And I had been with Dad basically all the time, and he right away kind of said, "Well, yeah, or Isabelle can bring me down." And so at the beginning we did a couple of that. I could bring him down, or the therapist would come and get him. And then I realized in my head that I was basically hindering him by being there. So at nighttime, we'd often review the next day, and he says, "Yeah, I have therapy at this time, blah, blah, blah." And I lied to him. I said, "No, well, I won't be able to make it for that, so you'll have to figure out how to get down there. So you have a choice." And I said, we'd often look at choices, what are the options for you to accomplish. I said, you can wait for Nafisa, your therapist. She'll come and get you. or possibly you could try it on your own. See how that goes.
I think that's the day he got stuck in the elevator and he wrote a story about being stuck in the elevator.
Possibly, and now he knows I did it on purpose.
Yeah. So you're the reason I was stuck in the elevator.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm also the reason he's not stuck in the elevator, if we know what I mean.
No, yeah. You're the reason why, like I said at the beginning of this, you're the reason he has succeeded as much. And I really want to highlight that because I think I've seen it for the past 2 and a bit years, but I think it's easy to miss looking outside in. That's easy to miss who is enabling him to succeed, and that's you.
Yeah, it's a lot of setting up, but that drive, the confidence may become, the setting up, the learning might have come from me, but your dad sets the pace. He does want to lead a full life, and he does not want to be a burden.
Yeah.
And he, if we look at the paddleboarding event, a completely different perspective, really, from his side. It's what we used to do together. He doesn't want to hold me back. And so perhaps we can see that he did it for me. I mean, it can be doing it for him, but it's such a give and take, this life as a caregiver, dependent, or chronically ill, or whatever. It's such a give and take, right? It has to be a real team effort. He does not want to stop me from paddleboarding, and he knows we paddleboarded together, and he wanted to see if that could come back in his life, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely, and it did, and it's been amazing. All right, so we're going on a little bit long, but I want to hit one more topic with you before we end up for today, because this is the first time we've had you on, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about it. So we're going to go on a little bit longer today and have a especially long episode. So the last thing I want to talk about is a bit about mental health. And this is something that's been extremely apparent for people close to you. I think the family near to you. I think this has been something that we've all been dealing with for the past 2 years, but it's something that we should talk about a bit more, and I think you have talked about, but a lot of people still struggle to realize. So being Jim's wife and caretaker and full-time assistant, and as you've talked about, providing all the care you have to give and all the things you have to go through as well as he does, how has this affected you mentally?
Well, initially I'm going to say was both definitely physical and mentally, emotionally, because of the being in hospital 12, 14 hours a day and doing everything else. So initially physically I was very, I don't know, it's the trauma that does it. You know, I had no strength. I could barely move. I remember literally dragging myself to a yoga class, and basically, if anyone can depict this, I basically lied on my mat the entire time, barely able to move my arms, so I couldn't even get to all on all fours or standing or anything. Yeah. And anybody who knows my yoga practice knows it's a fairly strong yoga practice, so it's active, and I couldn't move. So physically, and the physical over time I've worked at and has definitely come back. The emotional has not, and the emotional has not. It's basically torture every day to watch your dad live in this body that doesn't move, and try to make the effort to live the best life you can is emotionally draining. This is, and to watch your dad work so hard for sometimes very little return, because some days fail miserably. emotionally is torture.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say.
So I'm gonna go back to when did you first realize you were fighting this emotional and physical exhaustion that you had? When was the first big moment that said, okay, I have a problem here?
Well, I think you come to that very slowly. I had tried to get help initially, but very unsuccessfully. The health system is full, and there was no room anywhere, it seemed. So basically, all of that emotional thing was put on the back burner. You just do. You just go through the motions. You do what has to be done. You don't think about the emotional trauma. And it was only when we returned home where now everything really falls to me because you're out of hospital. That it was obvious that I needed some kind of help, and so did Jim, in dealing with the reality of what was our life. And so, because I had tried through my own family doctor to hook up with some kind of counseling, but been unable. I'm probably still on that wait list. I've never been contacted. Wow. And so we basically went to your dad's doctor, and he said, I need help, but probably more so now. I've had help for a year. Your dad had been followed for a year, but all kinds of professionals, and said, you've got to find us someone, and you've got to find a way of jumping the queue. We cannot wait.
Yeah.
And so Dad's doctor, Dr. Paul Bassan, found us a counselor basically starting immediately, and it's through those sessions that you start examining things that you haven't examined before.
Can you give me an example of something like that you came to realize only through help of a counseling session?
Of things I've realized through the counseling session?
Yeah.
Well, they make it's a little bit like being a therapist to dad. They put seeds in your head. Well, tell me how you see returning to work, or how would that work? And it's through those kinds of conversations that you examine. And I'm one, love my job, love the people I work, and desperately would love to be at work. But if I examine things and I'm realistic, I see that it's not sustainable. It's too much emotional drain. My work is going house to house and helping families through crises, very much like the one I'm living with your dad, and trying to give them strength to overcome all of those problems. And when I barely have the strength to get myself through my day, so suddenly that energy isn't there. I could look at saying, I could ignore that and say, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go. And I realized through conversations basically that it was be only a matter of time that harm would either come to myself, harm would come to your dad, or somebody on the street with just through sheer exhaustion and inattention. You would hurt, my job involves a lot of driving, and there's some days after a night shift I'm too tired to drive. So that would only lead to problems and wouldn't be right, wouldn't be doing, that the oath we take as health professionals is to do no harm. And certainly, you can't look after others when you barely have the energy to pull yourself through your day.
Yeah. I think the first time, I don't know, I think we all realized that you were going through a tough time, but the thing that really drove it home for me that you had problem and you need to talk to somebody, and the path you were on wasn't viable, was there's one day, I believe, when Dad was still at GF Strong and you were staying at, I can't remember where, you were renting a house or something, and you were so exhausted that you were unable to get out of bed, that you were like literally bedridden until somebody came and helped you out of bed. Do you remember this? Do you remember telling me about this? So tell me about that again. What happened? They're like, I think it's hard for people to imagine being physically unable to get out of bed from not, I'm not going to say from nothing, but from their perspective, you're just, Dad's at the hospital being cared for, 24/7 effectively, and you're just living along with him. How does that cause you to be physically unable to get out of bed?
That's what people don't see, is that, there's a book called When the Body Says No. And I believe it's Gabor Mate, a doctor, that wrote it. That's, you read that, and when you're well and you read that book, you think, oh, yeah, that would never happen. But I see it, that's exactly what happened. The body, the emotional pain becomes so much that you basically have body, full body reaction. I couldn't move, and I cannot describe it any more than that. I was in bed, and I remember going, I can't move, I can't get up, I don't know what I do from here. And I so literally reached over. I always had the phone because Dad was in the hospital, and I wonder, I literally grabbed the phone, and I think there's a picture of that too, where I literally just lifted my hand and clicked, and said, I only knew after that there was any picture there. And then I remember thinking, now what? And I phoned a friend. I phoned one of our good friends, Anne, and she lived in Calgary. But she was well aware of our situation, and she said, what's going on? And I said, I can't move. So basically, from Calgary, she phoned one of Dad's friend who lived close, and he had already been to the apartment, so he knew where it was, and he had to kind of break in, and we took it one step at a time from there. So, and he came in, I think he was a little bit taken aback as well. And, it's hard to explain. It's hard to make people understand that emotional trauma can definitely wreak havoc with your body, and suddenly it can physically stop you from moving.
Yeah, and I think that was the first real highlight to me, and I hate to say it, because it takes a physical disability for people to realize there might be an emotional hurdle that you are facing. And I think that's a sad reality of the state of mental health right now, is that there's that huge stigma behind it, that people, you can say, I'm not, that I'm struggling and I need help, but until you physically struggle, people are unwilling, or maybe skeptical is perhaps a better word, that you are in fact injured. And I think that moment when I heard about this incident, that was, proof that you had been carrying such an emotional weight for so long that it finally broke you physically. I'm just as guilty of this as anyone, because although I knew you were struggling and I knew you had been seeking out counseling, I think this was the real moment for me anyway, realizing that you were in fact battling something real and you really needed help and support. And I know it's sad to say, because I said there's this huge stigma, and I'm just as guilty about it as anyone. So being in that situation, how does it make you feel when you come to somebody, a doctor or a counselor or a friend, saying, this isn't going to go well, that I might be okay at this very second, but if this is not a sustainable path, and that this is going to end in failure, and having them either treat you with skepticism or disbelief, how do you face that?
I guess I face it by holding on to the belief that I am doing the right thing. If we look at the accident as having, basically, I have lost everything I had from this accident. The life I had, the job I had, the health I had, everything. I hold on to the belief that the only thing this accident is not taken away is my reputation as a therapist. I've worked 30 years without hurting anyone. And I don't want to take a chance on that. I know, I know, I feel the pain every day. I know that I would not be able to give myself completely to the job, that I wouldn't be able to give it what it needs. And that wouldn't be unfair to whoever it would be that I would see. Mm-hmm. And who knows? Does it change? I have no idea. Your dad's disability doesn't get better. It only gets worse. The system, provides some help, but very little. It is the counseling discussions that have helped me see that it's only asking for trouble if I try, and I did try, sadly unsuccessfully. It was very clear within a few very short shifts that and that experience was good in the sense that it proved it, that I wasn't just saying, oh no, I can't. There's a very physical, emotional trauma there that is still there, and who knows what will happen. That's still all up in the air, but I hold on to the belief that I'm doing the right thing. As a professional, you're supposed to assess how your capacity to do your job is, and I know I'm not at full capacity.
What were some of the indications to you in those few short shifts that this wasn't sustainable?
Basically, all I had to do for those short shifts is shadow. So I basically was with a therapist and just shadowed. And just encountering the clients and their situations. I realized that I no longer had the same boundaries when you work as a therapist, and in order to not burn out, you need to have very clear boundaries around what you're going to take on. And I feel that my protection device to prevent from burning out, my strength to keep those boundaries is lost somehow. Mm-hmm. Just not sure if that makes any sense.
I think a little bit. So you felt that your ability to judge where your boundaries were had been mitigated, and that if you can't prevent your burnout, then the only inevitable outcome is that you will burn out.
Well, it's again, it goes to emotional toll. I emotionally struggle every day with seeing your dad, and now to go house to house to house to house to house all day long and dealing with trauma, and more trauma.
Yeah.
I don't have that emotional reserve.
Yeah. There's you'll never have a break from dealing with trauma.
It's one trauma over the other, and brings you back to all those emotions you felt, and it brings you back basically to the state you were in. And if you're well and untraumatized, you're able to distance yourself from it and somehow keep that buffer, and it allows you to teach your clients how to get over it. But if you're taken in by all the pain that you see, then you're no longer when you say a detached observer. You can no longer see without prejudice. Is that, you know what I mean?
Yep.
I got the wrong word. Yeah.
Bias.
Without bias, or, you know, you have to be a sideline observer in these situations and assess the situation. And when you're emotionally exhausted, you're unable to do so. Yeah.
That makes sense to me. I think, again, I think it's more obvious to people who are close to you and see you every day that what you were dealing with. What would you say to people who are unsure if they are, maybe not unsure, but to people who are dealing with these kind of issues, who are struggling mentally, what would you say is their best alternative? Like, what would you tell them to do to help them through this process?
Well, I think what has saved me over and over again, probably first, first in front of any healthcare, is your the friends around you, or your close support group. They save you. They have to be willing to walk that very painful walk beside you, and kind of walk alongside you. And it's not a fun thing. And more than doctors that only see you very far apart and with very limited time, and they are the ones that prevent you from going off the deep end, really. So friends and people in your life. And there comes the catch-22 that when you're emotionally exhausted, it's easy to push people away. And it's easy to say, I have no energy to see you, and say no. And the more you say no, the more people don't know how to help you. And the more they want, and if they love you, they want to respect what you're saying. So you're telling them no, so they don't want to be in your way. They don't want to be nagging you. And so I always tried very hard, even at my lowest, to not push people away. And so I always either said things like, I can't tonight, or whatever, or I'm too tired, but can I take a rain check, or can we schedule that for another day? Anything that made them understand that I did want their love and their support and whatever help they wanted to bring, but that perhaps that the timing was off. But I really tried to never say no. I always tried to quantify that and say, I can't now. Can I call you back on that? Or sometimes I just say something very open. Let me think about that. They'd say, what can I do for you? And I'd say, let me think about that. Nothing comes to my mind right now, but can I think about it and text you if I think of something? And they'd say, yes, of course. And then they feel like they're not rejected. It's not a no. Mm-hmm. And I feel you have to be very careful to not alienate, because people want to respect what it is that you say, because you're exhausted and they can see that.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple really good examples of times when you were in the hospital and we had friends who did exactly that, offered help, and you told them not no, but let me think about it. And then it resulted in them, helping you in ways that you did not think you needed help. Like, can you...
Yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. And as I like to point out, these two men, I want Keith Shaw and Doug Hansen. I really want to thank them because for men, I found them particularly insightful in two cases. So here are the stories. Doug, said, "Hey, Isabelle, I'm in Chilliwack and I'm going to be coming to visit Jim and just want to know, before I go, is there anything you need?" And you say then, "No, no, it's all good. Just come visit Jim. That's what he needs. That's all good. I don't need anything." And stuff. So fine, we leave it at that. And then that's early in the morning, and then he's at work, and so just before he leaves, he texts again and says, "Hey, Isabelle, I'm just checking in again, like, is everything on, okay for me to come out?" And then he added this. He said, "Isabelle, like, anything you need. I drive a truck." And as soon as he said, "Hey, Isabelle, like, really, like, I drive a truck, anything you need," and that I immediately went, "Oh my God, my bike." Because at that time I didn't have a car. And so I just said, my bike. Do you think you could bring my bike?" And he said, "Of course, Isabelle, I drive a truck." And so he brought my bike, and it was a very big part of my getting better physically a little bit. I could take some bike rides around Stanley Park, and it was part of my wellness plan, so to speak, and it really, really helped. And the second one is Keith, same kind of thing, say, "Hey, I'm coming to visit Jim." And I said, "No, I don't need anything. Just come visit Jim." "Yeah, that time works." And so he says, "Okay." And then he goes off to work. He was working in Vancouver that day. And then probably mid-morning, he texts me again. And he said, "Just checking in, just seeing how you're doing. How is Jim?" And, just checking in again, because he goes, "The last place I'm going to be before I visit." I mean, how would you even think to say something like that?
Yeah.
And I don't even know why. He said, "Well, I just wanted to tell you the last place I'm going to be before I come to you is the Thrifties at whatever." And immediately, again, like, this light bulb went up, and I went, "Oh my God, fruit. I haven't had any, like, I don't have any fresh stuff in I don't know how long." Like, and so I said, "Fruit, right? That's it." And then he said, "Okay, like, this is all by text." And then maybe 15 minutes, because I had fruit. I said, "Wait a minute, I need this too." So then I text him another thing. I forget what it was. Bananas, apples. And then the next time, 10 minutes later, one more thing. And then all he did, he text back, he goes, "Keep it coming. I'm making a list." And suddenly, that was really helpful for that day. I mean, there are such small things, really, but that make a difference. So when people want to help, what I would say is, first of all, stay in there. Even if you get no's, it's good to just gently keep coming back and checking in. So the checking in, "Hey, how are you? Thinking about you." It can be as simple as that. Just keep checking back in. And then, things like these stories highlight that sometimes pushing a little bit more and saying, "Hey, like, I drive a truck, or I'm going to be here, would there be any food you need? Like, I'm driving by." That was helpful to trigger my head into remembering something that would be helpful.
Yeah. It's incredible how something such offhanded, perhaps, just saying, "Oh, by the way, I'll be here," or I drive a truck, or something that's completely unrelated to the topic at hand, but that really jogs your memory into a practical solution, something I actually need. And this is something that I also found interesting when we spent a lot of time at the hospital in GF Strong, and people, like you said, are trying to help or come and visit, and people would bring cards and well wishes, and that we had a table full of them, and it was incredible. But when people brought practical things, or people sent gift baskets of food to the hospital, and I found those were the biggest benefit. That it's not that we didn't appreciate all the cards and well wishes, but like as you're saying now, the things that truly make a difference are these small things that people forget about in a time of distress. And as you hit on with the fresh fruit, like you would hardly eat any fresh fruit in a week because you had been in hospital and there's no time to eat. And this I just kept coming back to this idea that food was the best thing people could give us when we were in hospital. When I was in Hawaii with you a couple of days after the accident, and I believe it was WestJet put us in the hotel, and they said, yeah, the food's paid for, just go and eat. And that was a small thing, but it was good because it said, well, we'll get breakfast here before we go to the hospital because it's paid for. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to go somewhere and find food. It's just here. And it was a way of forcing both of us, I think, to eat somewhat healthily and get food in us, period, any food in us, because I think if people didn't show up with food in hand saying, here, eat this, so we would have spent 24 hours in the hospital. We wouldn't have left Dad's side, I don't think. So it's interesting to hear you tell these stories, because there are examples of what I saw in Hawaii and in GF when people came up with practical solutions to providing assistance instead of just thoughts and prayers. They would show up with a practical item that was valuable.
Well, there's even another story now that comes to mind that is even weirder. So these two were people we knew. When we just got your dad back to VGH, he was basically, the trip back basically almost killed him again, and I'll always remember that. And so he was actually more unstable when he first arrived in VGH than he had been in Hawaii. And that was because of the distress caused by the flight back. Mm-hmm. And so I was basically pretty much almost round the clock at the hospital. And I remember leaving. Your dad was in an isolation room and with negative ventilation, and you had the gown, glove, and mask, and anyways, it was very traumatizing. And I remember crawling back to the nurse said when I arrived that night, she said, well, I have a basket for you, but there was food in it, so let me know when you're leaving and I'll bring it to you. I actually put it in the fridge for you. And that's unusual for someone to take such care, but she did. And so as I was leaving, I said, oh, you said you had something for me. And she said, yeah, just wait a second, I'll go get it. And she brings me this basket, and I grabbed it and went to the hotel, which was a couple blocks away. And now it's very late at night. And what happens in these cases is you're so taken up by being at bedside that you, like you said, you don't feel hunger. And then I literally got to the hotel, realized I hadn't eaten in I don't know how long, and now everything is closed. It's close to midnight. And I said, well, I might as well see what's in here. And I open it up and I take the card out. And first I thought, oh, I must be going crazy, because I wanted to know who it was from. And I open the card and I read the name. It means nothing to me, absolutely nothing. And I'm going, boy, I'm really losing my mind. I don't even recognize my friend's name.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm thinking, right? I'm thinking I haven't eaten. My brain must be dead or something. So then I start to read the card. And thankfully, the first thing that it says is, hi, Isabelle, you do not know us.
So you're not going crazy.
It's like, I thought, oh, good, I'm not going crazy. And it says, you do not know us. We belong to the community at Studio B Yoga. And, I'm going to cry, my God. I still remember reading this. And it said, we do not know you, but judging from how upset everybody is at Studio B, I can only surmise that you and your husband are amazing people. And so I thought that I would send this. And this was basically a basket full of little goodies, from granola bars to cookies to, water bottle, and basically kept me alive for one other day.
Wow.
But the kindness of people like that basically has carried us through for over 2 years. So if your heart is telling you that you should do something, like this person just truly listened to their heart. I mean, I don't even know how they figured out where to send it in Vancouver.
Yeah.
But somehow it came to me, and those are lifelines in those moments.
Yeah, it's always incredible, and we've been saying this from day one, but the support we've been receiving from family, friends, and from literally strangers reaching through the internet and apparently from yoga studios has been incredible. And as you said, it's carried us through. And in that one moment, that is, like you said, literally kept you alive for another day to go to the hospital and to support Jim and to get us to where we are now.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the kindness of strangers. So if if you're out there, those kindnesses, even though you don't know, you might never know their outcome, but just believe in your heart, I guess, that if something is telling you to do something or to say something, because the only reason I can see Keith or Doug telling me, hey, I drive a truck, why would you ever say that? But whatever, it came in their heart and they just said it. They didn't analyze it. They just said it. And that was huge.
Yeah, and it made a difference, and that's the important bit. So this has been a really incredible podcast. I think it's been really great that we got to get you on and to talk about all these things. It's been a little bit longer, but I think it's worth it. I think we've covered some really good things. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about before we start wrapping it up?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and there's, stuff we could go on probably a whole bunch, but I think it's a good time to break it off. We've, approached a lot of good topics, and there's always more to say. So
yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure we'll come back to a few of these topics. I'm sure we'll have you on again in a future episode. If you're listening to this and you've really enjoyed this episode, please let us know. You can drop us a comment either on our website, www.myquadriplegic.life. The podcast is there, and you can drop a comment right in that page there, or you can put a comment on Facebook or wherever you might have found this podcast. If you're listening on iTunes, you can leave us a review. That always helps us out as well. It gets the podcast to be promoted a little bit more on iTunes. And as we've talked about, a lot of the stories that we've been telling in this episode, you can go and read about on our website, myquadriplegic.life. You can follow us day to day on our Facebook page, Jim Ryan Rolling Through Life. And Jim is on Twitter at Jim Ryan RTL. RTL is for Rolling Through Life. And I'm on Twitter at Piloteerman. So you can follow us on there if you want to. And one more time, thank you so much for joining me, Mom. It's been absolutely incredible to have you on, and I'm so happy we got to do this.
Thanks for the invite, and hopefully we'll chat again.